Welcome to all of you. It's so great to see so much interest in gardening with native plants. And I hope that this information will get you started on some adding some plants to your garden or creating a new garden. So first, we need to talk about why would you plant a native garden? Why not use imported plants from around the world? What's so important about growing natives? I just wanted to tell you that I was walking through my neighborhood last week, walked around about a mile, and in that whole mile, I saw plants from Asia. I saw plants from South America and South Africa, and I saw some from Australia. And I only saw 4 native plants on that whole tour through the neighborhood. It's time for us to start using some of the plants that are local to California, and we'll talk a little bit about why. Native wildlife cannot use these exotic imported plants. There are a few, but mostly if you were to fly over a neighborhood and looking for food to feed your babies or to hold you through a migration, you would find nothing. It would be the same as if you were flying over a paved parking lot. We really need to add in some food sources for our native birds and for the pollinators. Another reason that we want to choose native plants is that they are adapted to our particular climate, to our soils, and to the soil microbiome that is unique to California. We can reduce the amount of water that we use, we can reduce the amount of maintenance, and we can have healthier plants. For example, a lawn will use about 1 inch of water per week. That's about an average amount of water that needs to be put onto a lawn. This is drinking water in general. This is drinking water that we're pumping in, and we're spreading 1 inch per week on our lawns. That's approximately 39 inches of water per year. That's almost waist deep. That's how much water we're putting on lawns. Natives will take 3 to 6 inches of water per year in general, depending on where they're from. And so we're saving a lot of water, we're feeding the wildlife, and we have an opportunity to restore our land to some of the original plant material that was here. We can create corridors and large islands that will support our wildlife, and we can start to join these together and create an ecosystem in our neighborhoods. So why do we not choose native plants? This is something that's going to be on the mind of most people who are looking at native plants. Most people think that they're really messy. They are hard to find. And they do require a different set of instructions for installing and taking care of them. So we're going to go through some of these points, and I'll show you how to do some shortcuts, and hopefully you'll feel empowered and you'll be able to choose plants for your site. So I will be talking about the plants as we're scrolling through the slides. I'll talk about some of the ones that have the pictures showing up to give you some ideas about their characteristics. This is a Ceanothus concha, and blooms beautifully in February, March. In front of that is a white sage. Smells wonderful, by the way. So again, here are some of the reasons that we are interested in putting in native plants. We can restore our natural ecosystems, which will help support the pollinators, which will also in turn help to support the birds. These are climate-adapted plants that are used to the water in the winter and dry in the summer. And it is a fresh, updated look. It's not going to be one of those lawns with the shrubs around the edge, kind of a garden that was popular in the 20th century. And I'm hoping that we can get some new ideas about how to arrange plants. It's a good idea for us to stop and talk about this. There are people who are really sticklers for absolute local plants that are native to this specific neighborhood, this area, and that's wonderful. But they're often not as neat or as colorful as some of the cultivars. So my own personal philosophy is that it's okay to mix in some of the hybrids and some of the natives, uh, some of the hybrids and some of the fancier plants with your other more local plant material. We'll talk about this a little bit more as we look at the individual plants. So here's your step-by-step process. We're starting with the site conditions. We're going to talk about style and garden type and what your goals are, and then creating wish lists of plants from those lists that you've come up with. And then we'll talk a little bit about arranging them at the very end. Oops. Oh, okay. So here's some of, these are 4 scenarios that we're going to be talking about. There are many more, but these are some of the more popular ones. So we're going to run through these and I'll go into more depth with these. And you can do further research on some other garden conditions. So these are all the site conditions that we're going to be talking about. The most important thing when you're choosing the plants, choosing native plants, is choosing a plant that is going to do well in your particular on your particular site. This is going to be what your neighborhood is like, the slopes that face in different directions, your soil, and all of the microclimates where you have some colder air pockets or you have sun or shade. You've got to really assess your site first in order to choose plants that are going to do well in your particular area. Here are the 4 foundations of success. We do like to show this slide at most of our presentations because these are the 4 factors that are going to ensure that your plants do well. And you want your plants to be healthy. If they're not healthy, it doesn't matter how many flowers they will produce or what you wish that they would do, but it's never going to do well unless you have the right soil for the plants, you give it the right water, the right aeration, which is going to be how much the soil drains, and then of course the sun or shade. Heavy soils, and a lot of you are very interested in this because we do have this heavy soil in our area. I'll show you a few plants that do well in heavy soils and what you can do to help improve the soil if you really have to have that ceanothus planted in your front yard. And right here we have it's a sage. This is Dara's Choice sage. I've had really good luck with this in heavy soils. And this is a manzanita. This particular manzanita is sunset, and it does very well in moderately heavy soils also. Western redbud is one of the most adaptable native plants that we have. It's a small tree. It's fairly slow growing, so you'll have a shrub for a while. Just make sure that you think about its eventual size when you do plant it out, because it will turn into a small tree later. And this one will take heavy soils. It'll take being flooded. It'll take drought. It'll take whatever you can throw at it. And the white icicle currant also will take, all of the currants will take heavy soils. They do very well. They grow up on Mount Diablo. They grow near streams. They grow anywhere where there's a little bit of shade. They will do very well. Very easy to grow and super fast. Here's some perennials that will do well in some heavy soils on the upper left. That's a Matiliha poppy. We have some more pictures of it later that I can show you. It's a huge plant. You want to plant that out someplace where it can spread. And you have a California poppy, you know, those will go just about anywhere. They love compacted soil, anything disturbed. And on the right, we have a red buckwheat. Buckwheats will in general take heavy soils. I'll tell you more about how to research it later so that you know which buckwheats will take your heaviest soils. The red buckwheat is a beautiful plant. And for the shade, coral bells, another really adaptable plant, really easy to grow. Many hybrids that are absolutely beautiful with colored leaves. The closer that you get to the original local coral bells, the easier they are going to be to grow. And foothill penstemon, this margarita bop, which stands for back of porch, um, is one of the easiest penstemons to grow. It stays low to the ground and spreads very wide, give it a lot of space. It blooms mostly in the spring and then it'll shoot up a few flowers here and there, but it's a beautiful fine texture that looks great mixed with some heavier, larger leaves. The foothill penstemon is available in most nurseries now. It's really easy to get. Okay, now hillsides. In Contra Costa, we have a lot of places that have some cuts where the houses have been built into a slope, and you have these big hillsides that need cover. The great thing about native plants is that they do hold the soil better than most of the imported plants. They form a relationship with the soil microbiome to hold the soil in ways that imported plants just can't. They form this sticky goo that helps to hold hold the soil in place. And here you have the Yankee Point ceanothus. You'll be seeing that one a lot because it's one of the most adaptable plants that we have. It's been in the nursery trade for at least 40 years, maybe longer. Grows very, very fast, has a large green leaf, flowers in the spring. One of the best features of the Yankee Point ceanothus is that it blends in with more traditional gardens because the leaf is so large and so green, and you can mix it in. It'll take a little bit of water, it'll take a little bit less water. You don't want it to go completely dry, but it's a very adaptable plant. And the coyote brush, which is one of my favorites, but people have a love-hate relationship with it because it does need to be cut back really hard every winter in order to get this boxwood-like fresh leaf color to it. But it's worth it. If you have a difficult spot, you can't get better rooting system to hold a hillside in place. Or if you need some really good quick cover for a dry spot, you can let this go all summer without watering it once it's established, and it'll do okay. Just be sure that you cut it back really hard. And then we have the globe mallow, super fast growing, very satisfying large plant. Does best when it's cut back twice a year, but it's very satisfying and the pollinators absolutely love it. And the California fuchsia, which many of you may know, I would highly recommend that you get the hybrids because they won't spread as much as the straight plants. So do get something like a Mattol Select, something that has a fancy name to it, because those are going to stay nice and compact. Okay, let's see. So here's a hillside that I did in Walnut Creek. This one has been terraced. It's a lot more expensive to do the terracing, but it's another way to deal with hillsides, and you can the terracing does help hold in the moisture, so that makes it a little bit easier to care for and it's easier to access. And there's the Dara's Choice sage again. which is very gratifying plant because it spreads about 2 feet tall and maybe about 8 feet wide. Very quickly too. It's an excellent plant. Here's some quick cover for hillsides. Here's a close-up of the Yankee Point ceanothus. You can see the leaves are large. They're about 1.25 inches, 1.5 inches. They're really rich green. The lilac verbena, also that one is widely available in the trade now. Makes a big, huge mound. Give it lots of room, big fluffy mound, and it blooms almost all summer long. Had pollinators all over it. Very satisfying plant. And the Cleveland sage, wonderfully aromatic. Some people call it aromatic, other people call it a little overwhelming. So plant it someplace a little further from the house if you don't really enjoy that sagey smell. Very gratifying, fast growing once it's established. The pollinators go crazy for this. And again, that's best cut back once a year. St. Catherine's lace. This is another buckwheat. It's huge. So give it a lot of space. If you've got a big hillside and you need to cover it quickly, buckwheats are a great way to go because you can plant them out every 8 feet and you'll get a lot of cover. And again, pollinators all over it. Here's some more. So the Terraseca is similar to the Dara's Choice. It spreads wide and covers a lot of ground very, very fast. And the deergrass has a real unique root structure that will help hold the soil. You don't really need to cut back deergrass. Some people do, but I like the mixture of the straw-colored the straw-colored leaves and then some of the greens. It's really very dramatic, especially when it's backlit like this one. So what do you do if you have some shade and you want to grow some native plants? Here are a few that will do well. Again, the coral bells, because they're very adaptable, and we're going to see several of those. Easy to grow and very satisfying. I'm showing you some mugwort, which takes a light shade. It can actually get into some pretty deep shade. It does spread with rhizomes underneath, but it has a beautiful texture to it, and it's very lightly scented if you crush the leaves. And then this is roure, which is miner's lettuce, which is an annual. It comes out in the spring, and your whole yard will be covered with it if you plant one of them. The following year, you'll have a massive green forest like this one. And as much as you don't eat, the rest can be put in the compost pile. Here's some trees and shrubs that do well in the shade. A vine maple. It's an understory tree, so it's used to being under other trees and getting some light shade. It's a fairly slow growing tree, but it looks a little bit like a Japanese maple. So some people like to substitute this for the Japanese maple. The coffee berries, they're just the most luscious green, and they grow very well in shade. I wouldn't put them in the sun. In central Contra Costa County, you could get away with some sun over by the coast, and maybe in Richmond and Berkeley, you could have some sun on it. Oregon grape, it's great if you have some deep shade and you really need something in there. It doesn't have the most beautiful shape to it, but it does fill in when you have some real deep shade and you really need something there. But its real benefit is for the pollinators. The pollinators love this. And it's one of the, maybe not a keystone species, but it does supply a lot of food and habitat for a number of our pollinators. And huckleberry. Huckleberry grows wild on the hills here, starting on the Orinda Hills, but it's worth growing them, and you can grow them in a pot. Beautiful tiny green leaf. It can be trimmed. You can trim it into whatever shape you want. Not a very fast growing plant, but it is very beautiful and it blends with traditional plants, imported plants. And the flowering currants. These are one of the most satisfying plants. They'll take the light shade, they'll take some fairly deep shade. They bloom beautifully in the spring. They're a great pollinator plant. They're a very important habitat plant, and they're super fast. You can plant out a 1 gallon, and within a year, you're going to have a full-grown shrub. You can prune them, you can cut them back, you can do whatever you want to them. They'll take clay, they'll take sand. They do need a little bit of water, but not a lot, and that's just to keep them fresh looking. They'll survive if you give them no water. Okay, so some more shady plants. Oh, these monkey flowers. Yeah, they don't take real deep shade, but they will take some shade. Very satisfying plants. They come in every color you can think of, except maybe purple. This one is Fiesta Marigold. It's widely available and grows quickly. Most monkey flowers only live for about 2 years, so just keep that in mind. But they're worth growing because they do support the wildlife. The hummingbirds go crazy for them, and they are easy to propagate from cuttings as long as it's not a patented plant. California aster, there's several kinds. They do very well, easy to grow. There's some really tall ones, some really short ones. They bloom, they're starting to bloom right now. Great for pollinators, especially the little tiny pollinators that have troubles getting into some of the larger flowers. And yellow lupin, which is so spectacular. This is at the community center in Lafayette. It's growing under oak trees, grown from seed, absolutely gorgeous. And here are some that take a little bit more water, but they're so much fun. And these are natives. So it's fun to make a little shady nook. If you have a place where you want to give it a little bit of extra water, maybe you have a little rock garden or you want to grow some pots in a shady nook. These are fun. So this is there's a 5-finger fern, these are maidenhair ferns. Most of the maidenhair ferns that you get in the nursery are not actually native. They're I think from Chile, but they'll work and they support as many pollinators as the locals. And this is a columbine. You can get a number of native columbines. And then Berkeley sedge, which again is usually sold as a native, but it's not. But I'm not going to be a stickler about that. It's close, and they're absolutely beautiful mixed all together. And annuals. Now this is where you can have a lot of fun because there are a number of annuals that'll take light shade and not real deep shade, but light shade. The baby blue eyes. California poppy will take a little bit of shade. Chinese houses are a real standby for part shade, and these just grow them from seed. They do really, really well, and they're absolutely beautiful. And of course, the rue again. Garden tolerance. This is something that a lot of you responded to on the poll. Some things that you're interested in. To be a garden tolerant native, you have to be able to tolerate a little bit more water than some of the others. It needs to be something that's going to blend well with the local plants, with whatever you have in your yard. It's mostly about fitting in with the cultural conditions of your traditional plants. Sunset manzanita, can't say enough about it. It's an excellent plant. You can pinch it back and keep it really tight. I know some people don't like to do that to manzanitas, but I think it's worth having some that will stay short and compact. And this valley violet ceanothus is one of the most beautiful plants I've ever seen. And that also can be trimmed back a little bit in the summer so that it maintains a real nice little ball shape. The valley violet ceanothus grows about 2 to 2.5 feet tall and about 5 feet wide. It's a great size for a garden. Pacific wax myrtle. I've tested this out in a number of gardens, and it does need a little bit more water than some, but it has this beautiful lush green foliage, and it does grow quickly when it has the right conditions. A sugar bush is not planted nearly enough. It's fast growing, easy. You can trim it or you can leave it large and it'll grow into a small tree if you're looking for a small tree. Or you can keep it short as a little hedge and it does just fine. And the flowers and the little berries, you can make lemonade out of them. There are two varieties of rhubarb that grow, well, these are mostly Southern California plants, but they do well here. There's an inland variety, and then the that's the Rus ovata, and then there's another one that is coastal. So here are 4 sort of garden types. These there are many more ways to organize your garden, but these are some of the ones that are the most popular, and so we'll be talking about some of the how to choose plants for each of these garden types. Pollinator gardens is huge, and for so many reasons too. Insects have evolved alongside specific plants, and they will often not be able to raise babies unless they have a very specific plant. So when you're choosing native plants, especially locally native plants, then you're helping with the native pollinators. And we've got, of course, hummingbirds are pollinators also, and butterflies. Okay, here are some popular pollinator garden plants. These are great for butterflies. And some of the smaller pollinators, they love the daisy-shaped plant flowers where they can really get in there. They don't have any petals in the way. Here's some more nectar flowers. These are all excellent. These are all on the handout, by the way, so you don't have to write them down. With many of the pollinators, they have to have a specific host plant. If you look up keystone species, you can find out more about that. Here are a couple of them. We're all familiar with milkweed. This is our local. We have 2 local milkweeds. This is the narrowleaf milkweed, which, by the way, is not a great landscape plant, but it is fun to have some around the periphery where you don't look at it that much. It looks cute in the pictures, but it does get aphids, and that's what you want it to do. So plant milkweeds away from your fancy gardens. The black oak. This is a black oak, which has any of the oaks are going to be a keystone species. They're going to be really important for your pollinators. Okay, well, and then we're to front gardens. The reason I've included this is because so many people think that the native plants are really messy. And if you are going to be putting plants in your front yard, you want them to be a nice frame for your house. You want it to tell a story of upkeep and fitting in and being careful with presentation. So I've included some plants here that are a little bit neater than, you don't want to have a wild thicket, especially in the front yard. The California buckwheat, I've included it here because it is a really rich color. Um, the the flowers attract a lot of pollinators, and this is a plant that can be sheared into a hedge. So you can keep this really tight, and it'll fit in really well with um, exotic plants. Seaside daisy, super neat, stays in a little low um, mound, and it blooms off and on through the year, mostly in the spring. Another great pollinator plant. Emerald carpet manzanita. There are a number of these low growing manzanitas that form a beautiful carpet. They're a little bit tricky in the central county. They do better over by the bay. They need very good drainage. And there's the wax myrtle again, super neat. There's your emerald carpet manzanita again, and the sunset manzanita, which is can be it can be pruned into a little ball. And there's the valley violet ceanothus again. It's very colorful. The gold coin daisy. That one is not. I'm going to switch. I'm going to keep going on that one. Here's the concha ceanothus again with the white sage in front, and you can see how dramatic that is. If you have some good contrast in the foliage, it's going to make it feel a little bit neater, a little bit more cared for, a little bit more intentional. What I like to do is alternate plants between a dark, heavy green and some of the grays, and I alternate the sizes of the leaves. If you're going to be layering them back or you're going to be putting them next to each other, think about how the leaves will contrast with each other. One trick to making some good drama is to pick out the plants at the nursery and put them together on the cart and arrange them around and see which plants seem to show off the other plants really well. What's going to stand out? What's going to be a good contrast? You don't want to have a lot of little fuzzy things right next to each other. It tends to make it a little bit messier. Here's some sculptural plants. They do take a while to develop that structure, but once you do get the manzanita pruned up this way, you get this beautiful red bark and a real clean looking trunk system. Dr. Hurd manzanita does that as well. The Lewis Edmonds has a smaller, greener leaf, and the Dr. Hurd is fun to play with because it does have big, round, grayish leaves that contrast beautifully with some dark greens. Okay, we'll talk briefly about small spaces. Not all of the native plants are going to do well in pots. This is something that you're going to need to research. And not all of the plants are going to be able to stay small. We'll have some repeats in here because some of the plants that we've already talked about that are really neat are going to do well in small spaces as well because they can be pruned. And so they can occupy a smaller space. Again, the flowering currant, you can keep that pruned. The seaside daisy is very short and it does very well in a pot. Both of these will do well in pots. There aren't a lot of these native dogwoods that do well in pots, but the brown twig dogwood, I've had one for 8 years in a pot and it's doing very well. That's what this one is. And the Margarita penstemon that we've talked about before, that will do well in a pot. Any of the monkey flowers are going to look great. And yerba buena, which is so beautiful in a pot because it spills over the edge and then just kind of crawls along the ground. really easy to propagate, that one too. There's a huckleberry. Again, that does very well in pots. And any of the coral bells. Again, those are very adaptable and you can grow those in pots. Okay. Well, I'm talking pretty quickly, so we're doing well on time. I want to talk a little bit about the local natives because if you really want to have if you want to recreate an ecosystem in your yard, this is where you really want to be turning, is to the plants that have been grown from plants nearby. We'll talk a little bit more about that. This, by the way, is at Black Diamond Mines Park. And this is a lupin. It's a big surprise. It smells like grape soda at the very top of a hill. Growing there wild. Nobody planted it. It's always so funny to see plants that you go, wow, how did that get there? In our area, toyon is everywhere on the hills, and it grows naturally, very easily. I've seen a lot of yards where toyon is planted by the birds. It just does very, very well here. It'll take sun, shade, any kind of soil that you throw at it. It produces berries right at the time when the migrating birds need it the most. And the berries are balanced with the right kind of protein and carbohydrates that the birds need to be able to migrate successfully. Some of the imported plants have berries that are like junk food, and they don't really give them all the nutrients that they need. Nandina, which is heavenly bamboo, is one of the ones people have been talking about recently. It also has a little it has the wrong kind of carbohydrates in it, and it also has a little bit of toxicity. So when the birds fill up on that, they're not getting the kind of nutrients they need, and it does cause some bird decline. There are local ceanothus. Mostly it's going to be buckbrush, but there are some others that grow locally. It's great if you can source some of those. There are nurseries that do carry local plants. They're going to give you give the pollinators the kind of access that they need for their food. Okay, so coffeeberry, there are local ones. They're not going to have the leaves aren't going to be quite as large as the hybrids, but there are local coffee berries. Buckbrush, it's not quite as showy as the hybrids, but it supports a great number of pollinators and birds. There are lots of different kinds of manzanitas that grow locally. If you can choose a plant that naturally occurred in your area or that naturally grows within 5 miles of your garden, you're going to be supporting the wildlife in the best way that you possibly can. There's the toyon again. There are the berries, beautiful berries. It's a gorgeous plant. It'll take pruning. It'll take whatever you can give it. There is one problem with the toyon. It does sometimes get thrips, but it does recover the following year. So you do want to just let it go. I wouldn't use it as an anchor plant for that reason, because it can sometimes get thrips, but it is a really helpful local native. Mule fat, it's just so pretty. They're so much fun. And then all the local manzanitas. There was a garden that we did in Clayton for the museum. We sourced 2 manzanitas that were propagated from a place that was just like 2 miles away. And we got some other manzanitas from other areas. And guess which ones grew the best? They just grew like crazy. They were beautiful. The local plants will do the best. They're adapted to exactly where you are. Here's some perennials. These are fun. Actually, this one is more of an annual, but checker mallow is gorgeous. Uh, that is not a Western redbud. I don't know what happened there. So many versions of this talk. Um, the silver carpet, that's something that I want to talk to you about, because when you do plant out the plants, you want to give them enough room so that they can fill in. And they get much wider than you think. In general, you want to give them, I don't know, 7 feet, 8 feet. What do you do with the ground in between when you're waiting for those to grow? Well, silver carpet is one of the best solutions for that because it grows very quickly and it fills the ground in between the plants. It grows about 6 inches tall and it's a great plant for pollinators. So you'll have something to look at and it'll keep the soil healthy. Here's the mugwort again. It does have some non-native forget-me-nots popping through it, but it was awfully cute. I couldn't resist showing that. And the gum plant, there are a number of plants that bloom later in the season. And those are very helpful for the pollinators because then they'll have flowers through the year. Gum plant is one of those that's very helpful in the later summer. Blue-eyed grass, can't get enough of that. It grows naturally wild on the hills. If you plant out one and it likes your yard, it'll reproduce and you'll have lots of it all over the place. And you may be wondering, how do you find what grows naturally in your area? Calscape to the rescue. Calscape now has a new site up, and they also have the legacy site. The references are in the handout, so you can look them up. They will tell you exactly what plants are native to your particular garden plot. It's lots of fun to flip through all of the plants that were there originally or are locally found in your area. Some of them are going to be hybrids. It'll tell you if they're hybrid or if they're local. But this is a great resource, and it's a real fun deep dive. So to have a really beautiful native plant garden, you want a garden that looks like a garden. You want it to look like someone cares and that everything is intentional. You don't want to have a wild patch, even as beautiful as they are when you go hiking. You don't want to just import a piece of wild into your yard. It's not going to look like a garden. So here are some of the things that are going to keep it really have a healthy garden that looks intentional. The number one condition is to match your plants to your site. That's number one, because when you have a plant that will take the right amount of sun, it'll take the soil that you have, that will take the heat or the cold that you have, your plants will be healthy. And a garden always looks better when your plants are really healthy. When you're organizing the plants, when you're planting them out, you want to put them into simple groupings. You want to have large groups of plants. You don't want to have one over here and one over here and everything. You want to have groups of 3 or 4 or 5 of the same kind of plant to keep it simple. That's how a garden is going to look clean and intentional. You're going to need to keep the plants a little bit tidy. For most of the plants, you're going to be giving them a little bit of water in the summer to keep them fresher looking than they would be if they were out in the wild, where they might go deciduous because of lack of water. They would live, but they wouldn't look as neat. And you want to keep them tidy with either pinching or pruning or cleaning up dead leaves. You want to keep them, you do need to do a little bit of maintenance. You need to cut back sometimes just to keep it, to maintain it as a garden rather than as a wild space. And when you're planning the garden, it's a good idea to create interest. And I've got another slide with this also. Introduce paths that'll carry your eye through the garden. Create mounds, do fences, do stones, do something to give it a little bit of structural interest. That makes it look more intentional as well. And here it is again. So you want to group the plants in larger groups rather than having a dotted one of each. It's not a um, it's not a demonstration garden. You want it to be look like your own space, your own garden. You want to build structure with rocks, with paths, with a dry creek, fences, anything that you can do to add an element of sort of human intention is going to make it look a little bit neater. Adding in flowers, whether they're annuals or perennials, makes it look more intentional, especially if you group them in larger groups. You want to space the plants for how big they're going to get when they are full grown, and then plant temporary plants in between. If the plants are too close together, they'll never look like their true form. They're never going to be able to develop their beautiful shape and form. And then plant combinations. This is something that it's a great shortcut. If you see something in a garden, on a garden tour or on a website, where you see plants that look great together, you can just take that plant combination and repeat it through your yard and it'll always look great. Another place to find out plant combinations is on Calscape or in some of the books on native plants. They will tell you which plants look great together and which plants require the same kinds of conditions. And we've already talked about adding structure with rocks and mounds and paths. When you're not working with a flat lawn, you can get creative with building and shaping the ground so that it looks a little bit more natural. With native plants, that does help unify the space. And as a bonus, when you're building mounds, you can get away with some heavy clays and still have great drainage. So you can mound up the soil, make a little dry creek, maybe make a rain garden, and mound up the soil, even if it's the clay, and it's going to drain better, and you'll be able to grow some of the plants that require better drainage, like ceanothus and some of the manzanitas. And it also looks great, looks very natural. Where can you learn more about native plants? Well, the garden tours, Bringing Back the Natives tour just ended. That was most of the yards were mostly native and very inspiring. You can take pictures and you can ask the homeowners what they what their tips are for growing native plants. You can find out what some of the plants that you think work well together. Demonstration gardens. I'll show you one in just a minute, but you might want to check out the Oakland Museum and some of the other local gardens. We've also started a demonstration garden in Concord. It's over at Geringer Park, and that's been in for a year and a half, and I'll show you pictures of that one. And online resources, we have those on the handout. There are so many online resources. So here's our demonstration garden. This was in October of 22. This is what it looked like, and some non-natives. Well, this was after we cleared out a lot of rosemary and some other plant material. And this was in March. So you can see how it's filled in March of this year. You can see how it's started to fill in, and we're starting to fill in some of the bare spots there to make a big difference in just a year and a half. This is deer grass, and in the foreground is the Terraseca sage. The sage that's backed by the power cables is that's a Cleveland sage, and the gray ground cover is the silver carpet. We've got deer grass and some ceanothus. It's coming along really well. If you need to see if you need inspiration on specific plants, come on out. We've got labels on all the plants. So in summary, why would we plant natives? We're trying to restore some of the native ecosystems to support the pollinators and the birds and the local network of wildlife. And well, it's fun. I mean, you sit outside and you watch the butterflies flitting from plant to plant, and you see the hum of all those wonderful little bees. Everything's just really alive. You want to match your plants to the site conditions so that you have healthy plants. You can match to the specific site using plants that are native to your area, or you can choose an area that has similar site conditions and match to that, or you can choose just plants that will take clay soil and put those in. Selecting native plants, build up a list of all the plants that would possibly grow on your site, and then choose the ones that you like out of that, and then narrow it down until you get a list of plants that you think you would like to have in your garden.